There's a scene in episode 12 of the second season, Better Angels, that I can't stop thinking about. Rick and Shane are walking into the woods at dusk, and if you watch their shadows on the ground, you see two figures moving in parallel. Partners, or at least they were once. Shane's carrying a gun. Rick's hand hovers near his own weapon. And both of them, I think, know how this ends. Two shadows stretching across the grass. And within minutes, there'll only be one. The question everyone asks is, did Rick have to kill Shane? Was it self-defense? Or was it something darker? The execution of a friendship that couldn't survive the apocalypse? But here's what I think we should really be asking. Not if Rick had to kill Shane, but why the apocalypse made it inevitable. Because when you trace their story from the beginning, from the moment Shane believed Rick was dead, every choice, every fracture, every moment of tension, it all leads to those woods. Two men who loved each other, walking toward the only ending the world would allow them. Tonight, let's explore why. Not to justify or condemn, but to understand. Settle in. This one's about friendship, leadership, and the impossible cost of both. Before we understand why Rick killed Shane, we need to understand what Shane became in Rick's absence. And it starts with love, not betrayal. In Season 1, Episode 3, Tell It to the Frogs, there's a flashback that shows Shane at the hospital when the outbreak begins. The building's being evacuated, people are screaming, and Shane goes to Rick's room. He checks for a pulse, listens for breathing, and finds nothing. Rick, in a coma, appears dead, and Shane, heartbroken, barricades the door with a gurney and leaves. He believes his best friend, his partner, the man he served beside for years, is gone. And then Shane does something that will define everything that follows. He goes to Rick's house, tells Laurie that Rick's dead, and he gets her and Carl out of Atlanta. This isn't opportunism. This is trauma response. Shane's just lost his best friend, watched the world collapse, and he's faced with Laurie and Carl, terrified and alone. And Shane makes a choice. He becomes what they need. He protects them. He leads them to safety. He takes on the role Rick would have filled if Rick were alive. And over days, then weeks, Shane and Laurie and Carl, they become a unit. Not by design, but by necessity. Laurie's grieving, Carl's traumatized, and Shane's the only stability they have. And somewhere in that desperate survival, in the late nights keeping watch and the constant fear and the relief of making it through another day, Shane falls in love with Laurie. Or maybe he was always in love with her, and Rick's death just removed the barrier. We don't know. The show doesn't tell us. But what's clear is that Shane's love for Laurie and Carl, it's real. It's not predatory or calculated. It's the love of someone who's keeping two people alive and finding purpose in that protection. Here's the question. Was Shane wrong to move on? Was he wrong to love Laurie, to sleep with her, to become a father figure to Carl when he genuinely believed Rick was dead? Because from Shane's perspective, he's honoring Rick's memory by protecting Rick's family. He's doing what Rick would have wanted. And Laurie, grieving and scared, she accepts that comfort. She doesn't resist. She needs Shane as much as he needs purpose. And Carl, he's just a kid trying to survive, and Shane's the adult who's teaching him, protecting him, giving him stability. So when fans talk about Shane betraying Rick, I think that's too simple. Shane thought Rick was dead. Shane made a choice to protect the people Rick loved. And that choice made in good faith during the apocalypse's first terrible days. That's the choice that dooms him, because Shane's first had to comes here, not in the woods with the gun. Shane had to become what Rick's family needed. And once he did, once he took on that role and fell into that love and that purpose, Rick's return became the thing that destroyed him. Shane's tragedy doesn't start when he raises the gun. It starts when he checks Rick's pulse and finds nothing. Rick returns in Season 1, Episode 3, and Shane's face when he sees Rick walking into the quarry camp. It's everything. Jon Bernthal's performance in that moment is layered. Shock, joy, relief, and underneath it all, dread, because Shane's just seen a ghost. And that ghost is about to reclaim everything Shane's built. Rick doesn't know about Shane and Laurie. He doesn't know that Shane's been sleeping in what used to be Rick's role. That Carl calls Shane for protection. That Laurie looks to Shane for decisions. Rick just sees his best friend, his family, and he's grateful they're alive. But Shane sees the end of the world he's adapted to, and he doesn't know how to process it. Watch Shane's body language in those early episodes after Rick returns. He's tense, territorial, standing too close to Laurie, watching Rick with Carl. And Laurie, she's drowning in guilt, pulling away from Shane, recommitting to Rick. And Carl, he's confused because Shane's been his protector. But now Dad's back, and Carl loves them both, but doesn't understand the tension. The family unit Shane built, it fractures the moment Rick's alive, and Shane's left holding pieces of something that's no longer his. And here's the emotional weight that I think gets missed. Shane didn't betray Rick. The apocalypse did. The apocalypse made Rick's survival impossible to plan for, made Shane's choices reasonable, and then brought Rick back and punished Shane for adapting. The theory here is that Shane's tragedy begins the moment Rick returns, not when Shane raises the gun months later. Because from that moment, Shane's role is unclear. He's not Rick's partner anymore. Rick's the leader, naturally, because the group knows Rick, trusts Rick, loves Rick. Shane's not Laurie's partner. She's chosen Rick definitively, painfully. Shane's not even Carl's protector in the same way, because Rick's his father. So what is Shane? He's the man who kept them alive when Rick couldn't. And nobody thanks him for it because thanking him means acknowledging Rick's absence. And nobody wants to do that. Shane's contributions, his sacrifices, his leadership during the hardest days, they're erased by Rick's return. And Shane, he can't articulate this. He can't say, I kept your family alive, and you took them back without acknowledging what that cost me. So he just simmers, resents, watches Rick lead with idealism that Shane thinks is going to get people killed. The pattern, The Walking Dead establishes here, and it's a pattern we see throughout the series, is that partnerships break when roles can't be renegotiated. Rick and Shane were partners pre-apocalypse, equals, brothers. But post-Rick's return, Rick's the leader, and Shane's, what? Second in command. The guy who questions Rick. The cautionary tale about what happens when you adapt too much. Shane needed a new role, a new purpose, and Rick didn't give him one. Not maliciously. Rick's just trying to keep everyone alive and doesn't realize Shane needs definition. But the absence of that role, that clarity, it's the crack in the foundation. And every choice Shane makes after Rick's return, every argument, every moment of tension, it's Shane trying to prove he still matters, that his way of surviving is valid, that Rick's return doesn't erase what Shane became. And Rick, well-meaning and exhausted, he doesn't see it. He just sees his friend acting strange, aggressive, questioning him. And that misunderstanding, that failure to renegotiate their partnership, it's the wound that never heals. Rick's return wasn't just joyful. It was Shane's death sentence, just delayed. The leadership war between Rick and Shane, it plays out across season 2, and the farm becomes their arena. And here's what's fascinating. Shane's often right, tactically, but he's wrong about people. In season 2, episode 7, pretty much dead already, Shane assaults Herschel's barn, kills the walkers Herschel's been keeping, and forces the group to confront reality. The dead can't be saved. And he's right. Herschel's keeping walkers in the barn was dangerous, delusional, based on hope that contradicted everything they'd seen. But Shane's method, pulling guns, screaming, massacring the walkers in front of Herschel and his family, it destroys trust. It proves Shane right and makes everyone hate him for it. And then Sophia, little Sophia who's been missing. She walks out of that barn as a walker, and Shane's vindication is complete and terrible. He was right. The walkers aren't people. Keeping them was foolish. But being right doesn't make Shane a leader. It makes him dangerous. Or look at the Randall situation in season 2, episodes 10 and 11. Randall's a kid from another group, and he's seen the farm. Shane wants to kill him. He's a threat. He knows where they are. His group could come back and attack. Rick wants a trial, wants to follow some version of law and ethics. And Dale, sweet Dale, he gives this impassioned speech about maintaining their humanity, about not becoming killers. And Shane's sitting there, and you can see he thinks they're all insane. They're debating philosophy while a real threat exists. And Shane's proven right, sort of, because Randall's group does cause problems later. But here's the thing. Rick eventually adopts Shane's position. In season 3 and beyond, Rick kills threats preemptively, doesn't give second chances, operates from the assumption that outsiders are dangerous until proven otherwise. Rick becomes Shane's philosophy, just too late for Shane to see it. The emotional anchor here is Shane's isolation. Every time Shane's right, the group pulls away from him. When he saves Carl by sacrificing Otis in season 2, episode 3, he comes back a hero, but the weight of what he did, shooting Otis in the leg to escape walkers, it's visible on his face. Shane saved Carl's life. He also murdered someone to do it, and he can't tell anyone. Can't share that burden, because sharing it means the group sees him as a killer. So Shane keeps it inside, and it eats at him. And every pragmatic, brutal choice Shane makes after that, it's in service of keeping people alive, but it alienates him further. Shane's keeping people alive and losing their love doing it. And that's unbearable, because Shane needs to be loved, needs to be valued, needs to be seen as the protector. And Rick keeps people alive and keeps their love. And Shane doesn't understand how. The theory here is that Rick's leadership required Shane's brutality, but Rick got the credit and Shane got the blame. Shane did the ugly work, killing Otis, confronting Herschel, being willing to execute Randall. And Rick benefited from Shane's willingness to be hated. Rick could stay idealistic, could maintain moral authority because Shane was willing to be the bad guy. It's a dynamic we see in The Walking Dead repeatedly. The person who makes the hard call gets exiled or killed, and the person who benefits from that call gets to lead with clean hands. And Shane, he sees this, He sees that he's being used, that his sacrifices are taken for granted, that Rick's leadership depends on Shane being willing to cross lines Rick won't cross. And it's infuriating. And it's why Shane eventually snaps. Here's the question for you. If you had to choose, would you want Shane's brutal pragmatism leading you, or Rick's hopeful idealism? Because Shane keeps you alive in the short term. He makes the calls that eliminate threats, that prioritize survival over ethics. But Rick keeps you human in the long term. He builds community, maintains hope, gives you something to survive for beyond just not dying. And the tragic thing is, maybe they needed both. Maybe Rick needed Shane to do the ugly work so Rick could stay clean. And maybe Shane needed Rick to provide the hope that made the ugly work worthwhile. But two alphas can't share one pack. And the farm, isolated and tense, it wasn't big enough for both of them. And everyone, on some level, knew it. The group chose Rick. And Shane, pragmatic to the end, he understood what that meant. If the group chose Rick, then Shane had to go, one way or another. The barn massacre in Season 2, Episode 7. It's the moment Shane's pragmatism becomes something the group can't forgive. Let's trace exactly what happens. Herschel's been keeping walkers in his barn, believing they're sick people who can be cured. The group discovers this, and Rick's trying to negotiate with Herschel, find a compromise. Shane thinks negotiation is suicide, so Shane takes matters into his own hands. He breaks open the barn, and walkers pour out, and Shane and the others shoot them down one by one. And it's brutal, necessary. And Herschel's family watches in horror as their loved ones, Herschel's wife, his neighbors, people he knew, are executed in front of him. And then the final walker stumbles out. And it's Sophia, Carol's daughter, the girl they've been searching for since Episode 3. She's been in the barn the whole time, turned, dead, and no one knew. Shane was right. The walkers were dangerous. Keeping them in the barn was foolish. Sophia couldn't be saved. But the way Shane forced this truth, the violence of it, the disregard for Herschel's grief, and the group's hope, it destroyed something. Rick shoots Sophia, not Shane, but Shane's the one who made it necessary. And in that moment, Shane's rightness becomes irrelevant. Because being right isn't enough. The group doesn't just need someone who'll make the hard call. They need someone who'll make the hard call without destroying their humanity in the process. And Shane can't do that. Shane's truth-telling is violent, forced, traumatic. And the group, already exhausted and grieving, they can't forgive him for shattering their denial so brutally. The theory here is that The Walking Dead punishes people who force truth before others are ready to accept it. Dale dies in Episode 12 of Season 2, killed by a walker before the Randall situation is resolved, before he can see whether his moral stance would have worked. Herschel's denial about the walkers almost gets people killed. And Shane, forcing reality, he's tactically correct, but socially destroyed. The show's pattern is clear. You can't drag people into truth. You have to lead them there, gently. Let them arrive at harsh realities on their own terms. Rick understands this instinctively. He negotiates with Herschel, builds trust, and eventually, Herschel accepts that the walkers are gone. But Shane doesn't have that patience. Shane sees the threat and eliminates it, and he doesn't care who he traumatizes in the process. And that impatience, that inability to let people grieve their illusions, it's what makes Shane a liability instead of a leader. Here's the emotional weight. Sophia's reveal proves Shane right. and makes the group hate him for it. Carol, Sophia's mother, she's devastated. She spent weeks hoping, believing, searching, and Sophia was dead the whole time, and Shane's violence exposed it. And Carol can't thank Shane for that truth. She can only hate him for forcing her to face it. Rick, who shoots Sophia, he's the one doing the mercy kill, the final act, and the group sees Rick as tragic, burdened, doing what must be done. But Shane, who opened the barn, he's just the villain who took their hope away. It's the same outcome. Sophia dead, walkers eliminated, farm safer. But Rick's framed as sacrificial, and Shane's framed as monstrous. And Shane knows it. You can see it in John Bernthal's face. Shane knows he did the right thing, and that it doesn't matter, that the group's already decided he's the problem. The pattern is, being right doesn't make you a leader. It makes you dangerous, because people don't follow logic, they follow hope. And Shane's rightness, untempered by hope, it makes him someone the group fears instead of trusts. Rick's wrong a lot in Season 2. He trusts Herschel too much. He delays on Randall. He tries to negotiate when action's needed. But Rick's wrong in ways that preserve hope. Shane's right in ways that destroy it. And The Walking Dead, over and over, shows us that people will choose hopeful and wrong over accurate and brutal, because survival without hope is just a slower way to die. And Shane, for all his tactical brilliance, he never learned how to give people hope. He only knew how to keep them alive. And in the apocalypse, that's necessary, but not sufficient. You have to keep people alive and give them a reason to want to stay that way. Rick could do both. Shane could only do one. And that's why, even when Shane was right, he was losing. Laurie's at the center of Shane's spiral. And I don't think we can understand why Rick had to kill Shane without understanding the triangle that made it inevitable. In Season 2, Episode 2, Bloodletting, Laurie tells Shane explicitly to stay away from her and Carl. She says something to the effect of needing space, of choosing Rick, of Shane needing to accept that what they had is over. And Shane, he tries. You can see him trying. He pulls back, focuses on camp security, throws himself into survival tasks. But Shane's also watching Laurie and Rick, and he's watching Carl, and he's seeing the family he thought was his being reclaimed by someone who wasn't there when it mattered. And that's corrosive. In Season 2, Episode 10, 18 Miles Out, Laurie reveals to Rick that she's pregnant, and Rick asks if it's his, and Laurie doesn't know. She genuinely doesn't know if the baby's Rick's or Shane's. And this ambiguity, it's the final nail in Shane's coffin. Because as long as the baby's parentage is uncertain, Shane has a claim. He has a reason to be involved, to protect Laurie, to stay close. But Laurie's made it clear she doesn't want that. She wants Rick, wants the family they had before, wants to pretend Shane never happened. And Shane, he can't accept that. He can't accept that months of protecting Laurie and Carl, of being their family, of loving them, that it just ends because Rick's alive. Shane's love becomes obsession because the apocalypse gave him a family, made him believe he'd earned them, and then took them away without explanation. Here's the emotional anchor. Shane lost his why. In Chapter 1, Shane's purpose was protecting Laurie and Carl. That gave him meaning, made survival worthwhile. But when Laurie chooses Rick, when she tells Shane to stay away, Shane loses that purpose. And he keeps surviving because that's what you do, but he doesn't have a reason anymore. He's just there, watching the family he built, be someone else's family. And that purposelessness, that loss of meaning, it's what breaks him. Because Shane's not built to survive without purpose. He's built to protect, to lead, to be necessary. And Laurie's choice makes him unnecessary. And unnecessary people in the apocalypse, they become liabilities. They become dangerous because they're looking for purpose. And sometimes that search becomes destructive. The theory here is that Shane's death begins when he loses his purpose, not when he raises the gun. The gun's just the culmination. The real death is the slow realization that the family he'd die for doesn't want him to, that the woman he loves has chosen someone else, that the boy he's protected sees him as a threat to his real father. Shane's functional grief after Laurie's rejection, it's inadequate. He needed to grieve and move on, find new purpose. But Shane couldn't. He stayed stuck, watching, hoping Laurie would change her mind, believing that if he just proved himself enough, if he kept everyone safe enough, she'd see that he was the better choice. And she never did. And that hope, that refusal to let go, it poisoned everything. Here's the question. Did Laurie's choices push Shane toward violence? Or did they just reveal what was always there? Some fans argue Laurie manipulated Shane, used him when she needed him, and discarded him when Rick returned. Others argue Shane was always possessive, and Laurie's rejection just made it visible. And I think both are true. Laurie made choices that hurt Shane deeply, sleeping with him, building intimacy, then cutting him off completely. But Shane's response, becoming obsessive and eventually violent, that's on Shane. Laurie's not responsible for Shane's inability to accept rejection, but she's also not blameless in how she handled the situation. She could have been clearer earlier, could have acknowledged what Shane did for her and Carl, could have helped Shane transition to a new role instead of just cutting him out. But Laurie's also grieving, confused, guilty, trying to repair her marriage. She's not thinking about Shane's mental state. She's thinking about her family. And that's human, but it's also the crack where Shane falls through. The pattern is, Shane's love became obsession because the apocalypse gave him family and then took it away. And obsession, in The Walking Dead, is always fatal. You can't obsess over what you've lost and survive what's coming. You have to grieve, adapt, find new purpose. And Shane couldn't. He stayed stuck. And that stuckness, that inability to let Laurie and Carl go, it's what leads him into the woods with a gun and a plan that can only end one way. Randall's the litmus test. In Season 2, Episodes 10 and 11, Rick's group captures Randall, a young man from another group. Randall's seen the farm, knows where they are, and Shane's position is clear. Kill him. He's a threat. His group could come back, attack, take everything. Rick's position is more complicated. They're not murderers. They should have a trial, follow some process that maintains their humanity. And Dale, in one of his final speeches, argues passionately that killing Randall makes them no better than the Walkers, that they have to hold on to who they were. And Shane's sitting there, listening, and you can see he thinks they're all insane. They're debating philosophy while a tangible threat to their survival exists. And Shane can't understand how Rick doesn't see it. The debate's really about, who are we post-apocalypse? Are we still bound by pre-outbreak morality? Or has survival redefined ethics? And Rick's trying to have it both ways. He wants to follow moral principles, but he also wants to keep people safe. And sometimes those goals conflict. Shane's answer is clear. Survival comes first, morality second. If someone's a threat, you eliminate them. If someone's weak, you leave them. If someone's slowing you down, you cut them loose. It's brutal, but it's consistent. And Shane thinks Rick's wishy-washy approach, trying to be ethical while also pragmatic, it's going to get people killed. And here's the thing. Shane's not entirely wrong. Rick's hesitation, his need to debate every hard choice, it does cause problems. The group's nearly overrun while they debate Randall. The farm falls partly because they're divided, exhausted by internal conflict. But Rick's approach has a strength Shane doesn't see. It keeps people together. When Rick lets the group vote on Randall, when he considers everyone's input, he's building consensus, trust. People follow Rick not just because he's capable, but because he respects them, values their voices. Shane's approach is efficient but authoritarian. He makes the call, enforces it, and if you disagree, you're wrong. And people follow that for a while, especially in crisis. But long-term authoritarian leadership breeds resentment. People need to feel valued, heard, part of decisions. And Rick gives them that. Shane doesn't. So Rick builds community, while Shane builds efficiency. And in the apocalypse, community survives longer than efficiency, because efficiency can keep you alive today. But community gives you a reason to want to survive tomorrow. The emotional weight here is that Dale dies, Season 2, Episode 11, before the Randall situation is fully resolved, killed by a walker in a field. And Dale's death removes the group's moral center, the person arguing most passionately for ethics over expedience. And with Dale gone, the debate shifts. It's no longer, should we kill Randall, but how do we handle threats? And Rick, without Dale's voice, he starts leaning toward Shane's position. Not immediately, but over time. By Season 3, Rick's executing threats without debate. By Season 4, he's throat-ripping a man. By Season 7 and 8, he's warring with Negan, using tactics Shane would have approved of. Rick becomes Shane's philosophy, just slowly, with more hesitation, with more guilt. But he becomes it. The theory is that Rick killed Shane, then spent 7 seasons proving Shane was right. Every brutal choice Rick makes after Shane's death, it's Shane's logic. The show's even explicit about it in Season 5, when Rick's talking to Tyrese and says something like, "You're not built for this world," echoing the exact criticism Laurie supposedly made of Rick to Shane. Rick becomes the thing Shane accused him of not being, a survivor willing to do whatever it takes. But Rick does it differently. Rick feels guilty, questions himself, tries to maintain humanity, even while making brutal calls. Shane never questioned himself. Shane was certain, ruthless, efficient. And Rick's version of Shane's philosophy, tempered with doubt and grief, it's what makes Rick a better leader. Because Rick's always struggling with the cost of his choices. And that struggle, that visible burden, it makes people trust him. They see Rick's not a monster. He's just a man doing monstrous things because the world demands it. And that's survivable. But Shane, certain and brutal, he looked like a monster, even when he was right. And people can't follow monsters. They can only follow people who look like they're struggling not to become monsters. That's the difference. That's why Rick, Led and Shane died. There's a conversation in Season 2, Episode 11, between Laurie and Shane that fans still debate. Laurie says something to Shane that questions Rick's suitability for leadership, suggesting Rick's not built for the apocalypse, not hard enough, not willing to do what's necessary. that conversation, those words, they're gasoline on Shane's spiral. Because if Laurie's saying Rick can't lead, if even Rick's own wife doubts him, then Shane's justified in thinking he should take over. But here's the thing. I don't think Laurie meant it the way Shane heard it. I think Laurie was trying to push Shane away, again, by insulting Rick, so Shane would stop comparing himself to Rick. But Shane interprets it as validation. If Rick's not built for this, then Shane must be. And if Shane's the one built for this, then Shane should lead. And if Shane should lead, then Rick has to go. The theory here is that Laurie's words triggered Shane's murder attempt. Not directly. Shane was already spiraling. But Laurie's doubt about Rick, voiced to Shane, it gave Shane permission to see Rick as an obstacle instead of a friend. Before that conversation, Shane's wrestling with loyalty. Rick's his best friend, his partner. Killing Rick would be betrayal. But if Rick's not capable, if Rick's leadership is endangering people, then killing Rick becomes a service to the group. It's not murder. It's survival. And Shane, desperate for justification, desperate to believe he's not a villain, he clings to that interpretation. Laurie said, Rick's not built for this. Therefore, Rick has to go. Therefore, Shane's not betraying his friend. He's saving everyone from an inadequate leader. The emotional anchor is Laurie's unintended consequence. She's trying to push Shane away, to make him stop hoping she'll choose him. But her method backfires catastrophically. By questioning Rick to Shane, by planting doubt about Rick's capability, she doesn't push Shane away. She pushes Shane toward violence, because Shane hears Rick's failing, and you could succeed. And Shane, already isolated, already grieving the loss of Laurie and Carl, already resentful of Rick's leadership, he takes Laurie's words and weaponizes them, and Laurie never knows. She doesn't see the connection between her conversation with Shane and what happens in the woods. She just knows Shane tried to kill Rick, and then Rick killed Shane. And Laurie has to live with the question, did I cause this? The pattern The Walking Dead shows is that words have weight. Laurie's manipulation, however unintentional, it pushed Shane toward a choice he was already considering but hadn't committed to. Before Laurie's conversation, Shane's thinking about it. After, he's planning it. And that's the tragedy of miscommunication in the apocalypse. Pre-outbreak, Laurie's words might have caused an argument, some tension, maybe therapy. Post-outbreak, Laurie's words contribute to a murder, because stakes are higher, emotions are raw, and there's no time to process or clarify. You say something, and the other person interprets it through their trauma and desperation, and suddenly words become weapons. Laurie meant to push Shane away. Shane heard permission to act. And the gap between those two interpretations, that's where Shane's murder plot lives. Here's the question for you. Did Laurie's manipulation cause Shane's death? Or did Shane's interpretation of her words reveal what Shane was always going to do? Because some fans argue Laurie's responsible, that she played with Shane's emotions and created the situation that got Shane killed. Others argue Shane was always heading toward violence, and Laurie's words were just the excuse he needed. And I think both are true. Laurie's not responsible for Shane's choice to try to kill Rick. That's Shane's choice, Shane's moral failure. But Laurie's words made that choice easier for Shane to rationalize. And in the apocalypse, rationalization is dangerous. Because if you can convince yourself that murder is survival, that betrayal is service, that violence is necessary, then there's no limit to what you'll do. And Shane Hearing Laurie question Rick, he convinced himself that killing Rick was saving the group. And that conviction, that certainty, it's what led him into the woods with a gun and a lie. The words that were meant to end Shane's obsession became the words that made his violence inevitable. Shane's plan in Season 2, Episode 12, is not a sudden snap. It's the end of a long calculation. Shane tells Rick he's seen Randall, that Randall's escaped, and they need to find him. And Rick, trusting Shane, follows him into the woods. And as they walk, as the sun sets and the trees close in, Shane's talking. He's explaining, justifying, telling Rick why this has to happen. And if you listen to Shane's words, he's not just trying to kill Rick. He's trying to get Rick to understand, to admit that Shane's right, that Shane should lead, that Rick's inadequate. Shane needs Rick's permission. He needs Rick to say, "You're right, Shane. You should take over." And Rick won't give it. The theory is that Shane didn't want to kill Rick. He wanted Rick to fail a leadership test. Shane wanted Rick to break down, to admit he couldn't handle the apocalypse, to step aside voluntarily. And then Shane wouldn't have to kill him. Shane could just take over, be the leader the group needed, protect Laurie and Carl, and everyone would see it was the right call. But Rick doesn't break. Rick stands there, listening to Shane, and Rick's face shows grief and resolve. Rick knows what Shane's planning. Rick's not surprised. And that lack of surprise, that calm acceptance, it enrages Shane, because Rick's supposed to be weak, supposed to fold under pressure. That's what Shane's convinced himself. But Rick's not weak. Rick's just different. Rick leads with hope instead of fear. And Shane can't understand how that works, can't accept that Rick's way is valid. So Shane raises the gun. The emotional weight is in Shane's hesitation. Watch Jon Bernthal's performance in that scene. Shane's crying, shaking, explaining himself. He doesn't want to do this. He loves Rick. Rick's his brother, his partner, the man he's served beside for years. But Shane's convinced himself there's no other option. That Rick's leadership is going to get people killed. That Laurie and Carl need Shane's protection. That the only solution is Rick's death. And Shane's trying to get Rick to see it, to understand, to forgive him before it happens. And Rick, he does understand. Rick sees exactly what Shane's become, what the apocalypse has done to him. And Rick's grief is enormous, but Rick's also resolved, because Rick knows that if Shane kills him, Shane becomes the leader through murder. And that sets a precedent. That tells the group that leadership's decided by violence. And Rick can't let that happen. The pattern, the Walking Dead establishes, is that murders are rarely sudden. They're the end of long arguments, long resentments, long spirals. Shane and Rick's confrontation in the woods, it's been building since Rick returned in Season 1. Every argument, every disagreement, every moment Shane felt disrespected or sidelined, it's been accumulating. And Shane's gun is just the final punctuation on months of tension. The show does this repeatedly. Relationships break slowly, then violently. And the violence is almost a relief, because at least it's resolution. The uncertainty ends. One person lives, one person dies, and the question of who's in charge is answered. It's brutal, but it's clear. And clarity, in the apocalypse, is sometimes what people crave even when it's terrible. Here's the question. Shane raised the gun, but Rick raised the knife. Who struck first? Because technically, Shane draws on Rick, which is the act of aggression. But Rick, he's been preparing for this. Rick knows Shane's planning something. And when Shane hesitates, when Shane's trying to explain one more time, Rick uses that hesitation. Rick fakes surrender, embraces Shane, and stabs him. And you could argue, Rick acted in self-defense. Shane had a gun on him. But you could also argue, Rick executed Shane, used Shane's emotional vulnerability to get close and strike. And the show doesn't give us a clear answer. It just shows us two men, both armed, both desperate, and one of them dies. And the question of who's the aggressor, who's the defender, it's left ambiguous, because maybe both are true. Maybe Shane forced Rick's hand by drawing the gun, and maybe Rick chose murder over disarmament, chose to end the threat permanently, and maybe Rick became Shane the moment the knife went in. Rick stabs Shane in Season 2, Episode 12, and the look on Andrew Lincoln's face. It's everything. Rick's crying. He's not angry. He's devastated. He's just killed his best friend, the man he trusted more than anyone, the man who saved his family. And Shane's dying, looking at Rick with shock and hurt. And Rick's holding him, whispering, "Damn you for making me do this, Shane. This was you, not me." And it's true. And it's not true. Because yes, Shane forced the situation by drawing the gun, but Rick chose the knife. Rick chose to kill instead of disarm, to end the threat permanently instead of trying to talk Shane down or subdue him. And that choice, that decision to kill, it's Rick's. And Rick knows it. And that knowledge, that he's capable of murdering someone he loves, it changes Rick forever. The theory here is that Rick killed Shane, not in self-defense, but to end the impossible situation. Because even if Rick had disarmed Shane, even if Rick had taken the gun and walked Shane back to camp, what then? Shane's tried to kill Rick. The group finds out. Shane's exiled or executed anyway. Or Shane stays. And the tension continues. And eventually, Shane tries again. There's no peaceful resolution once Shane draws the gun. The partnership's over. The friendship's over. And Rick, pragmatic in a way he's never been before, he recognizes that. Rick sees that Shane alive is a permanent threat, not just to Rick, but to the group's stability. So Rick doesn't try to save Shane. He doesn't try to reach him, to bring him back from the edge. Rick just ends it. Fast, brutal, final. And Rick's grief is real. But Rick's resolve is stronger. The emotional anchor is that this is Rick's first murder of someone he loves. Pre-apocalypse. Rick was a cop, trained to use lethal force when necessary. And Rick's killed walkers, killed threats. But Shane's different. Shane's his best friend, his partner, someone Rick would have died for, and Rick kills him. And that act, that willingness to kill someone you love to protect others, it's the template for every hard choice Rick makes after. Rick kills Shane to protect the group, and then Rick kills people in Woodbury to protect the group. Season 3. And Rick throat rips Joe to protect Carl. Season 4, Episode 16. And Rick massacres Terminus to protect his family. Season 5. And Rick wars with Negan to protect the communities. Seasons 7 or 8. Every brutal, ruthless, horrifying choice Rick makes, it traces back to this moment, to the knife going into Shane, to Rick's realization that he's capable of killing people he loves if survival demands it. The question for you, was Rick defending himself, or was he executing Shane for the group's stability? Because self-defense implies Rick had no choice, that Shane's aggression left Rick with murder as the only option. But execution implies Rick made a choice, that he could have disarmed Shane, could have tried to de-escalate, but decided Shane was too dangerous to leave alive. And the show deliberately gives us evidence for both. Rick's face shows grief, which suggests he didn't want this, that he's acting from necessity. But Rick's action shows planning, which suggests he was prepared for this, that he'd already decided Shane couldn't be saved. And maybe both are true. Maybe Rick's grief and Rick's resolve coexist. Maybe Rick's devastated that he has to kill Shane, and also determined to do it efficiently. And that duality, that ability to mourn and murder simultaneously, it's what makes Rick a survivor. But it's also what costs him pieces of his humanity, because you can't kill someone you love and remain unchanged. You become someone who's capable of that. And that's Rick. Post-Shane, Rick becomes someone who can kill friends, allies, people he cares about, if survival requires it. And Shane's the first. But he's not the last. And every time Rick makes that choice again, Shane's ghost is there, whispering, "This is what I tried to teach you." Carl shoots Shane. That's the final piece. And it's devastating. Rick stabs Shane, and Shane falls, and Rick's walking away. And then Shane reanimates, because everyone reanimates. And Shane's standing up, a walker now, and he's moving toward Rick. And Carl, Rick's son, Carl's been following them. He saw the confrontation, saw his father kill his father's best friend. And now Carl sees Shane as a walker. And Carl raises his gun. And Carl shoots Shane in the head. And Rick turns shocked. And father and son stand there in the woods, both having killed someone they loved, both changed forever. The theory is that Carl shooting Shane completes a moral transfer that Rick's stabbing began. Rick killed human Shane. Carl killed Walker Shane. And that division of the act, that shared responsibility, it's significant because Rick killed Shane out of necessity to end a threat, but Carl killed Shane out of mercy, to prevent his reanimation, to give Shane peace. Rick's kill was brutal pragmatism. Carl's kill was traumatized compassion. And together, father and son, they've performed the full cycle of apocalypse violence. Eliminate the threat, then eliminate the resurrection. And Carl, who's been sheltered, who's been protected, who Rick's tried to keep innocent, Carl's forced into that cycle. And that's the cost of Rick's choice. Rick killed Shane, yes, but Rick's killing Shane created the situation where Carl had to kill Shane too. And Carl loses his innocence, right there, in those woods, with the gun smoke still hanging in the air. The emotional weight is in what Carl's seen. He's seen Rick, his father, his hero, stab Shane. And then Carl's seen Shane, a man who's protected him, who's taught him, who's been like a second father, reanimate as a monster. And Carl's had to shoot him. And Carl's young, maybe 11 or 12. And he's just participated in a murder, suicide, resurrection, mercy kill sequence that would break most adults. And Rick, looking at Carl, he realizes what he's done. He's trying to protect Carl by eliminating Shane. But in doing so, he's exposed Carl to something worse. The knowledge that people you love can become threats. That killing them is sometimes necessary. That there's no safety, even in family. Rick's tried to preserve Carl's childhood. And in killing Shane, he's ended it. The pattern, The Walking Dead establishes, is that children pay for adults' failures. Carl loses his innocence because Rick and Shane couldn't resolve their conflict without violence. Sophia dies because Carol and Ed's abuse made Sophia vulnerable. Judith grows up without her mother because Laurie's complicated relationships created the tension that got Laurie killed. Indirectly, through stress during pregnancy and the prison attack. The show repeats this. Adults make choices. Children suffer consequences. And Carl shooting Shane, it's the clearest example. Carl didn't create the Rick-Shane conflict. He didn't ask to be part of Shane's obsession with Laurie. He didn't choose any of this. But Carl's the one standing in the woods with a gun, having just killed someone. And Carl's the one who'll carry that memory forever. Rick killed Shane to protect Carl, but Carl had to kill Shane too. And that's the tragedy. Protection sometimes requires violence. And violence, even necessary violence, it traumatizes children. And Carl, after this, Carl's never the same. He's harder, colder, more willing to make brutal calls. He shoots a young man in cold blood in Season 4, the Woodbury Kid. He suggests killing the saviors in their sleep in Season 6. Carl becomes Rick's philosophy, survival at any cost. And it starts here, with Shane's death, with Carl's shot, with the realization that sometimes you have to kill people you love. The image I want to leave you with for this chapter. 3 people walked into those woods. Rick, Shane, and Carl, following behind, and 2 people walked out. But how many walked out human? Rick's killed someone he loved, crossed a line he can never uncross. Carl's killed someone he cared about, been exposed to trauma he's too young for. And Shane's body is left behind, twice dead, once by Rick and once by Carl. 3 people in those woods, and maybe none of them walked out human. Maybe they all became something else. Survivors, yes, but at what cost? And that's the question The Walking Dead keeps asking. Survival is possible, but every time you do what's necessary to survive, you lose a piece of who you were. And eventually, you look in the mirror and you don't recognize yourself. You've become the thing you were trying not to become. And that's Rick, post-Shane. That's Carl, post-Shane. That's the legacy Shane left behind. Rick becomes Shane. That's the pattern. And it's undeniable. In Season 3, Rick's dictatorial, making unilateral decisions, no longer consulting the group. He tells them, this isn't a democracy anymore, in the Season 2 finale, right after Shane's death, and he means it. Rick's become the leader Shane wanted to be, ruthless, pragmatic, unwilling to debate, and by Season 4, Rick's using Shane's tactics. In Episode 16, A, Rick throat rips Joe, a man threatening Carl. It's brutal, animalistic, shocking, and it's exactly what Shane would have done. In Season 5, Rick leads the group into Terminus, and they slaughter the cannibals. No trial, no mercy, just execution, Shane's philosophy. In Seasons 7 and 8, Rick wars with Negan, and the tactics Rick uses, attacking the sanctuary, cutting off supplies, willing to sacrifice some of his people for the greater good. They're Shane's pragmatism. Rick spent 6 seasons becoming the man he killed. The theory is that Rick's transformation was inevitable once Shane died, because Shane wasn't wrong about survival requiring brutality. Shane was just wrong about timing, about methods, about maintaining trust while being brutal. But Rick, he learned from Shane's mistakes. Rick learned to be brutal while maintaining hope, to make hard calls while carrying visible grief, to lead with Shane's tactics but Rick's humanity. And that combination, brutal pragmatism tempered with compassionate leadership, it's what makes Rick effective. But it's also what proves Shane right. Shane said Rick wasn't built for the apocalypse, and Rick proved him wrong by becoming Shane. Rick proved he was built for the apocalypse by adopting Shane's worldview. Just slowly, reluctantly, with more guilt. The evidence is in Rick's dialogue and choices. In Season 2, Episode 13, beside the dying fire, Rick reveals Jenna's secret, We're all infected. We all turn when we die. And the group's shocked, angry that Rick kept this from them. And Rick's response is essentially, I'm protecting you by controlling information. That's Shane's logic. Shane wanted to make decisions for the group's good without consulting them. Rick's doing the same thing. By season 3, Rick's openly dictatorial. He's hallucinating, seeing Laurie's ghost, barely holding it together, but he's leading through force of will and fear. By season 4, Rick's executing threats without hesitation. By season 5, Rick's telling the group, we're the greater threat to other survivors. Rick's internalized Shane's worldview. We're predators. They're prey, and mercy's a luxury we can't afford. The emotional anchor is that Shane's voice never leaves Rick's head. Every time Rick makes a brutal choice, he's asking, would Shane approve? And the answer's usually yes. Shane's ghost is Rick's advisor, the voice pushing Rick toward pragmatism when hope's failing. And Rick fights that voice, resists it, tries to maintain morality. But over seasons, Rick's resistance weakens. He becomes Shane slowly, almost imperceptibly. And by the time Rick's warring with Negan, by the time Rick's willing to sacrifice Alexandria's safety to defeat the Saviors, Rick is Shane, just with better PR. Because Rick's learned to frame brutality as necessary, to carry visible burden, to make the group feel like they're choosing violence with him, rather than having it imposed on them. That's the difference. Shane made unilateral decisions. Rick makes the group feel involved, even when he's already decided. And that emotional intelligence, that ability to lead brutally while maintaining connection, it's what Shane lacked. It's why Rick succeeded where Shane failed. The pattern The Walking Dead establishes is that protagonists become their dead rivals. Rick becomes Shane. Maggie, later in the series, adopts some of Negan's methods. She leads Hilltop with strength, makes hard calls, executes Gregory. Carol becomes what she feared, a killer, efficient and cold. The show suggests that survival requires adopting the traits of the people you defeat, that you become your rival to outlast them. And Rick, he becomes Shane because Shane's philosophy works. Brutal pragmatism keeps you alive. Hope without pragmatism gets you killed. See, Dale, Herschel, eventually Beth. But pragmatism without hope makes you a monster. See, Shane, the governor, Negan. Rick's genius is balancing both. He's brutal like Shane, but hopeful like Dale. He kills like Shane, but mourns like Herschel. He's the synthesis of the group's competing philosophies. And that's why Rick survives when Shane doesn't. Shane was just pragmatism. Rick's pragmatism and hope, violence and grief. Shane and Dale combined. And that combination, exhausting and contradictory as it is, it's what the apocalypse requires. Shane died because he was only half of what's needed. Rick lives because he's become the whole. Carl's letters in season 8 reject Shane's philosophy. Carl's dying, bitten by a walker, while helping a stranger. And he writes letters to everyone before he succumbs. And in those letters, Carl advocates for peace, for mercy, for ending the war with Negan without more bloodshed. Carl writes to Negan directly, telling him he can change, that it's not too late, that violence doesn't have to define him. And Carl writes to Rick, begging him to stop the war, to find another way, to build something better than endless conflict. And these letters, they're Carl's dying wish. Stop being Shane. Stop letting brutality define you. Remember hope. The theory is that Carl's final message is a rejection of the Shane-Rick philosophy that killed Shane and has consumed Rick. Because Carl's grown up watching Rick become Shane. Carl's seen his father go from hopeful sheriff to ruthless survivor. And Carl's participated in that transformation. He shot that Woodbury kid, suggested killing saviors in their sleep, became hard and cold. But Carl, dying, he realizes that path doesn't lead anywhere good. It keeps you alive, yes, but it destroys who you are. And Carl, with the clarity that comes from knowing you're dying, he tells Rick, choose differently. Don't let survival destroy your humanity. Don't become Shane. The emotional anchor is that Rick reads Carl's letters after Carl's dead. Season 8, Episode 9, and Rick's devastated. Because Carl's asking Rick to do the impossible, end the war with Negan peacefully after Negan killed Glenn and Abraham, after Negan terrorized the communities, after everything. Carl's asking Rick to spare his enemy, to show mercy, to choose hope over vengeance. And that's Shane's nightmare. Shane would see Carl's letters as weakness, as the naive hope that gets people killed. But Rick, grieving Carl, he tries to honor Carl's wish. Rick tries to end the war peacefully. And eventually, in Season 8's finale, Rick spares Negan. He slits Negan's throat just enough to stop him, not enough to kill. And then Rick imprisons Negan, keeping him alive despite everyone wanting Negan dead. And that choice, to spare Negan, it's Rick choosing Carl's way over Shane's way. It's Rick rejecting pure pragmatism in favor of hope. But here's the counterpoint. Carl could only advocate for peace because Shane and Rick did the ugly work. Carl's letters are beautiful, hopeful, compassionate, but Carl's only alive to write them because Rick and Shane made brutal choices to keep him alive. Shane sacrificed Otis. Rick killed Shane. Rick massacred Terminus. Rick warred with the Saviors. All of that violence, all of that pragmatism, it's what created the space where Carl could dream of peace. And Carl's letters don't acknowledge that. They don't say, thank you for doing the terrible things that kept me alive long enough to ask you to stop. They just ask for peace. And that's young and idealistic and maybe unfair, because Rick can't undo the violence he's committed. He can only choose what comes next. And Carl's asking him to choose differently going forward. The question for you, was Carl right, or was he naive? Would Carl's way of peace and mercy have kept the communities safe, or would it have exposed them to threats? Because The Walking Dead never fully answers this. Rick spares Negan, and for a while, it seems like a mistake. Negan's imprisonment creates tension. People want him dead. But over seasons, Negan changes. He becomes, if not good, then at least not purely evil. He helps the communities, saves Judith, kills Alpha. Negan's redemption, partial as it is, it suggests Carl was right. Mercy can change people. Hope isn't always naive. But the cost of that mercy is also visible. People die in the Commonwealth conflict, in part because resources and energy were diverted to Negan's imprisonment. Maggie's traumatized by having to see Negan alive. The question of whether Carl's hope was wisdom or luxury, it's left open. What's clear is this. Rick had to kill Shane so Carl could dream of something better. Shane's death was the moment Rick chose survival over friendship, pragmatism over loyalty, violence over hope. And that choice, and all the choices that followed, they traumatized Carl. They showed Carl a world where people you love become threats you eliminate. And Carl, dying, he rejected that world. He said, there has to be another way. And Rick, devastated by Carl's death, he tried to find it. He spared Negan. He ended the war. He chose hope. And maybe that's Shane's legacy too, strangely. Shane's death taught Rick that violence is sometimes necessary, but Carl's death taught Rick that violence alone isn't enough. You need hope too. You need something to fight for beyond just survival. And Carl, dying, gave Rick that. A vision of peace worth pursuing, even when it's hard, even when it's costly. Shane died, so Rick could become Shane. Carl died, so Rick could become more than Shane. And that progression, from Shane's pragmatism to Carl's hope, it's Rick's arc. And it's the arc The Walking Dead's been tracing all along. Did Rick have to kill Shane? After everything we've traced, after understanding the partnership that couldn't survive, the moral divide, the inevitability of their conflict, I think the answer is Rick chose to kill Shane. And that choice was both inevitable and tragic. In Season 9, Episode 5, Rick's final episode, he sacrifices himself on a bridge to save the communities. He blows up a horde, nearly dies, and is taken by a CRM helicopter. And Rick's arc, from Shane's death to his own departure, it's been about learning that leadership requires sacrifice, that survival sometimes demands terrible choices, and that hope and pragmatism aren't opposites, but partners. Rick learned that from killing Shane. He learned that you can mourn the violence you're forced to commit while still committing it. And that duality, that ability to hold grief and necessity simultaneously, it's what makes Rick a leader. In Season 8, Episode 16, Rick spares Negan, and it's controversial. Maggie, Daryl, others, they want Negan dead. But Rick chooses mercy, honoring Carl's letters. And when Rick imprisons Negan instead of executing him, it's Rick choosing a different path than the one that killed Shane. Because Rick could have killed Negan, easily, justifiably. But Rick chose to show mercy, to prove that violence isn't the only answer, that there's space for hope, even after brutality. And that choice, that evolution from I had to kill Shane to I choose to spare Negan, it's Rick's growth. It's Rick becoming more than Shane, more than pure pragmatism, more than survival at any cost. And yet, Rick never forgets Shane. Shane's ghost is there, in every hard choice, whispering, "You're becoming me." And Rick is. But Rick's also becoming something Shane never could, a leader who balances violence with hope. The theory is that had to kill Shane is a comforting lie. Rick chose to kill Shane. Rick could have disarmed him, could have tried to talk him down, could have taken Shane back to the group and let them decide. But Rick chose murder because it was efficient, final, and it eliminated a permanent threat. And that choice, and the guilt Rick carries for it, it haunts the entire series. Rick didn't have to kill Shane in the sense of no other option existed. Rick had to kill Shane in the sense of I became someone who chose to kill a friend to protect others. And I have to live with that. And the show never lets Rick forget it. Shane's ghost is in every brutal choice Rick makes. Shane's philosophy is in Rick's dictatorial Season 3, in Rick's throat-ripping Season 4, in Rick's war with Negan Seasons 7, 8. Shane never died, really. He just became part of Rick. The evidence is in how the show frames other deaths. When Rick kills Gareth in Season 5, it's brutal but justified. Gareth's a cannibal, a clear threat. When Rick throat-rips Joe in Season 4, it's self-defense and protection of Carl. But when Rick kills Shane, it's ambiguous. Rick's crying, grieving, and Shane's shocked, hurt. The show doesn't frame it as justified violence. It frames it as tragic necessity. And that's the point. Rick didn't have to kill Shane. Rick chose to. And that choice made Rick someone who could choose to kill people he loves. And that's a heavier burden than I had no choice. Because if Rick had no choice, he's blameless. But if Rick chose, then Rick's responsible. And Rick is responsible. And that responsibility, that weight, it shapes everything Rick does after. The question we can't answer, the one The Walking Dead leaves open, is, was there a world where both survived? Could Rick and Shane have found a way to coexist, to divide leadership, to respect each other's approaches? Some fans say no, that Shane's obsession with Laurie made peaceful coexistence impossible. Others say maybe. If Laurie had handled things differently, if Rick had given Shane a clear role, if the group had been less divided. And I think the show's answer is, maybe in another world, yes. But in this world, with these people, with this apocalypse, no. The apocalypse didn't have room for two alphas in one pack. The group couldn't function with divided leadership. Shane couldn't let Laurie go. Rick couldn't submit to Shane's authority. And so, one of them had to go. And Rick, pragmatic in a way he'd never been before, made sure it was Shane. And Rick had to kill Shane because two alphas can't share one pack. But killing Shane killed part of Rick too. The part that believed in friendship over survival, in loyalty over pragmatism, in hope over necessity. That part died in the woods with Shane. And what emerged, what walked out of those woods, was someone harder, colder, more willing to do terrible things. Rick became Shane, but he also became more than Shane. He became someone who could be brutal and hopeful, violent and compassionate, Shane and Dale combined. And that synthesis, exhausting and contradictory as it is, it's what the apocalypse requires. Shane was only half. Rick became the whole. But the cost was Shane's life and a piece of Rick's soul. And that cost, that's what The Walking Dead's about. Survival is possible, but it requires sacrifices that change you. And eventually, you're surviving, yes. But you're also someone you don't fully recognize. You're carrying the ghosts of everyone you've killed to stay alive. And Shane's ghost, that's the first one. The one that taught Rick what survival really costs. And Rick carries him still. We're back in those woods at dusk, back with two shadows on the ground. And after tracing everything, the partnership, the divide, the inevitability, the aftermath, those shadows mean something different now. They're not just two men. They're two versions of the same question. What does survival require? And what does it cost? Shane's shadow says, survival requires brutality, pragmatism, willingness to kill anyone who threatens the group, even if you love them. Rick's shadow says, survival requires hope, compassion, connection, something worth surviving for beyond just not dying. And the tragedy is that both are right. The apocalypse requires Shane's brutality and Rick's hope. You need both. But Shane couldn't be both. And Rick couldn't be both until Shane died. And Rick absorbed Shane's philosophy. So the shadows in the woods, they merge. They become one. Rick walks out of those woods, carrying Shane with him. Not physically. Carl shoots Shane's reanimated corpse, and the body stays behind. But psychologically, morally, Shane never leaves Rick. Every brutal choice Rick makes after, it's Shane's voice whispering, "This is what I tried to teach you." Every execution, every ruthless call, every moment Rick prioritizes survival over ethics. Shane's there, and Rick's grief is permanent because Rick can't separate. I killed Shane to protect the group from I killed Shane because I chose to become him. Both are true. Rick had to kill Shane because their conflict was unsolvable, and Rick chose to kill Shane because killing was easier than finding another way. And Rick became Shane because Shane's philosophy works. And Rick also became more than Shane because Rick learned to pair brutality with hope, learned to mourn the violence he commits, learned to carry the weight visibly instead of with Shane's certainty. The question Rick killed Shane for, the question the entire series traces is, did Shane's way of surviving die with him? Or did it just transfer? And the answer's painful. It transferred. Shane's dead. But Shane's philosophy survived in Rick, in Carl's trauma, in the group's willingness to make brutal calls, in the understanding that survival sometimes requires killing people you love. Shane lost the leadership war, but Shane won the philosophical war. Because by season 8, everyone's a little bit Shane. They've all made hard calls, killed when necessary, prioritized survival. Shane's pragmatism isn't the exception, it's the rule. And the only question is whether you balance it with hope, like Rick eventually learned, or whether you let it consume you, like Shane did. And that balance, that's what Carl's letters tried to teach Rick. And that's what Rick's finally learning as he walks away from Negan's cell, having chosen mercy over execution. You can be brutal and hopeful. You can be Shane and Dale. You can kill when you have to and cry about it after. You can survive and stay human. It's hard. It's contradictory. It's exhausting. But it's possible. Rick had to kill Shane. But Shane never really died. He just became the voice Rick hears in every impossible choice. The shadow that walks beside Rick, reminding him that survival's possible but costly, that leadership requires sacrifice, that sometimes you have to kill people you love. And Rick, walking through seasons of brutality and hope, of violence and compassion, he's learned to live with that shadow. He's learned to be Shane when necessary, and Rick when possible. And that balance, that painful synthesis, it's what makes Rick a survivor, not just alive, living, with ghosts, with grief, with choices he can never undo, but still standing, still leading, still carrying everyone, including Shane's memory, into whatever tomorrow brings. One shadow walking out of those woods at dusk, but somehow there are still two.